The gravel crunches beneath your tires as you turn off Highway 62, following a faded sign that reads Millfield Pop 847. But that number was painted decades ago, and now the town limits feel more like entering a graveyard than a community. Abandoned houses line the main street, their windows boarded up like closed eyes. The general store's door hangs on one hinge, creaking in the prairie wind. Even the stop sign at the intersection has bullet holes through it, as if someone took target practice at the very idea of traffic. You drive deeper into what was once the heart of this place, past empty lots where buildings once stood, their foundations now just concrete scars in the earth. And then, rising above the decay like a lighthouse in a storm, you see it. A white wooden church with a simple steeple, its paint somehow still bright against the gray sky. The parking lot is cracked and weeds push through the asphalt, but the building stands proud and intact. A small sign by the front door reads, Sunday service 10 a.m., all welcome. This is the story of the last church standing in Millfield, Nebraska, and the extraordinary people who refuse to let it die. But it's also the story of something much larger, the slow-motion collapse of rural America and the fierce determination of faith to survive when everything else has given up. Millfield wasn't always a ghost town. In 1882, when the railroad first came through this part of Nebraska, it was seen as the future. The town was platted along the tracks, and within 5 years, over 1,000 people called it home. There was a grain elevator that could be seen for miles, 3 churches, 2 schools, a bank, a hotel, and a main street lined with thriving businesses. The Millfield Gazette published twice weekly, and the high school football team, the Millfield Mules, drew crowds from 3 counties over. The Methodist church we see today was built in 1889, constructed entirely by local volunteers using lumber shipped in on the very railroad that brought the town to life. The congregation raised the money through pie auctions and barn dances, and every family contributed something: labor, materials, or skills. Old church records showed that the stained glass windows were donated by the Miller family, who owned the grain elevator, while the bell in the steeple was a gift from the railroad company itself. For decades, that church was the beating heart of Millfield. It wasn't just where people came to worship on Sundays, it was where town council meetings were held, where children performed Christmas plays, where wedding receptions were celebrated, and funeral meals were served. During the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, when crops failed and families lost everything, the church basement became a soup kitchen. When World War II took many of the town's young men, their names were read aloud each Sunday in prayer. But the same railroad that built Millfield eventually became its executioner. In 1963, the railroad company rerouted its main line 50 miles south, passing through larger towns with more efficient facilities. Almost overnight, Millfield lost its primary connection to the outside world. The grain elevator closed first, then the bank. Young people who might have stayed began leaving for college and never coming back. The Methodist Church, however, kept its doors open. Even as the congregation shrank from 200 members to 150, then to 100, the faithful continued to gather each Sunday. They maintained the building themselves, fixing leaks and repainting walls. When the church furnace died in the winter of 1978, the remaining members pooled their resources to buy a new one, even though it meant sacrificing other things. Hello everyone, this is Professor Archive, and welcome back to our channel where we explore the forgotten corners of history. I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Are you in a small town like Millfield, or perhaps in a big city? Drop a comment and let me know what time it is, where you are, and what you do for work. I love hearing from our community around the globe. If you're enjoying these deep dives into untold stories, please consider leaving a super thanks. It helps us continue bringing you these documentaries, and I genuinely read every comment and message you send. Now, back to Millfield and the remarkable people who kept that church alive through everything that followed. By the 1980s, Millfield's population had dropped to fewer than 200 people. The high school consolidated with a neighboring district. The post office closed, forcing residents to drive 20 miles for their mail. One by one, The other churches in town shuttered their doors as their congregations dwindled to just a handful of elderly members. The Baptist church was sold to a family who converted it into a house. The Catholic Church simply locked its doors one Sunday and never reopened. But the Methodist Church endured, anchored by a core group of families who refused to give up. There was Martha Davidson, a retired schoolteacher who had taught 3 generations of Millfield children. She became the church pianist at age 12 and was still playing those same hymns at 87. There was Frank Kowalski, whose grandfather had helped build the church's foundation. Frank took over maintenance duties, spending his weekends fixing whatever needed fixing, never accepting payment. And then there was Pastor Mary Beth Sullivan, who arrived in Millfield in 1987 when the congregation had shrunk to just 32 regular members. Most pastors saw an assignment to Millfield as a career dead end, a place to mark time before moving on to a larger, more prestigious church. But Pastor Sullivan was different. She had grown up in a small town herself, and she understood that the size of a congregation had nothing to do with the size of its faith. Under Pastor Sullivan's leadership, the church began reaching beyond its own walls. They started a food pantry that served families from a 20-mile radius. They organized transportation for elderly residents who could no longer drive themselves to medical appointments. When the town's last grocery store closed in 1994, the church basement became an informal community center where people could gather, share news, and support each other through increasingly difficult times. The 1990s brought fresh challenges that would have killed most rural churches. A devastating drought wiped out 3 consecutive harvests. The town's last major employer, a small manufacturing plant, moved operations to Mexico. The elementary school finally closed, its last class consisting of just 6 students. For the first time in over a century, there were no children's voices in Millfield. Many families packed up and left for opportunities in Lincoln or Omaha. Others simply moved away when they retired, seeking places with better medical facilities and services. The Methodist church congregation dropped to fewer than 20 regular members, most of them over 70 years old. The church's annual budget fell to less than $8,000 a year, barely enough to pay for utilities and basic maintenance. It was during this crisis that the congregation made a decision that would define the church's character for the next 3 decades. Rather than close or merge with a church in a neighboring town, they chose to adapt. They eliminated the full-time pastor position, sharing Pastor Sullivan with 2 other struggling rural churches. They organized volunteer work days where members and even former residents who had moved away would return to help with maintenance and repairs. Most remarkably, they opened their doors wider than ever before. The church began hosting community events that had nothing to do with traditional worship services. They held monthly potluck dinners open to anyone in the area. They started a Friday night movie series during the winter months, turning the sanctuary into a makeshift theater. They even allowed the local historical society to use the church basement for meetings and storage. This transformation attracted an unexpected ally. Descendants of former Millfield residents who had scattered across the country but still felt connected to their hometown. These people began sending donations to help maintain the church, seeing it as the last tangible link to their family history. Some even arranged for their own funeral services to be held there, wanting to be remembered in the place where their grandparents had worshipped. Pastor Sullivan retired in 2003 after 16 years of service to a congregation that never grew larger than 30 people but had somehow managed to touch hundreds of lives. Her replacement was Pastor Jim Martinez, a young seminary graduate who specifically requested assignment to rural churches because he believed small congregations needed passionate leadership just as much as large ones. Pastor Martinez brought fresh energy and new ideas, but he also understood the importance of preserving the church's traditions. He learned to play the same organ that Martha Davidson had played for 75 years, ensuring that Sunday services maintained their familiar rhythm. He memorized the names and stories of former members, keeping their memory alive through his sermons and prayers. Under Pastor Martinez's leadership, the church began documenting its own history and the history of Millfield itself. Members interviewed elderly residents, collected old photographs, and recorded oral histories before that knowledge was lost forever. They created a small museum in one corner of the church basement, displaying artifacts from the town's heyday alongside more recent mementos of community life. But perhaps most importantly, Pastor Martinez helped the congregation embrace their role as guardians of something larger than themselves. They began to see the church not just as their own place of worship, but as a symbol of persistence in the face of overwhelming change. They were keeping alive not just a building, but an ideal. The idea that faith communities could survive and even thrive in places that the modern world had forgotten. The 2008 financial crisis hit rural Nebraska particularly hard, and Millfield was no exception. Several longtime residents lost their farms to foreclosure. Others were forced to sell family land that had been in their families for generations. The church congregation dropped to just 15 regular members, and the annual budget fell below $6,000. It was at this lowest point that something unexpected happened. A travel writer from National Geographic, driving through Nebraska on assignment, stumbled upon Millfield and was struck by the sight of the white church standing alone among the ruins of the town. Her article, titled Faith in the Emptiness, was published in the magazine's online edition and shared thousands of times on social media. Suddenly, people from around the world began reaching out to the little church in Millfield. Some sent small donations, others sent letters of encouragement. A few even made pilgrimages to the town, wanting to see for themselves this symbol of stubborn hope. The church began receiving more visitors in a single month than it had seen in the previous decade. But the congregation handled this attention with remarkable grace and humility. They didn't try to turn their church into a tourist attraction or commercialize their story. Instead, they simply continued doing what they had always done, opening their doors to anyone who needed a place to belong, maintaining their building with loving care, and gathering each Sunday to worship together regardless of whether there were 5 people present or 50. Today, the Methodist Church in Millfield still holds Sunday services at 10 a.m., just as the sign promises. The congregation has stabilized at around 18 regular members, supplemented by occasional visitors and former residents who return for special services. Pastor Martinez is still there, now in his 3rd decade of service to rural churches. The building itself has been meticulously maintained, its white paint fresh and its steeple straight. But walk through Millfield today, and the church's miraculous survival becomes even more poignant. The town's population has dropped to fewer than 40 people, most of them over 65. There is no school, no post office, no businesses of any kind. Many of the houses are abandoned, their windows broken and their roofs caving in. The streets are cracked and potholed, with weeds growing through the asphalt. Yet every Sunday, cars arrive from towns dozens of miles away, bringing people who could easily attend larger, more convenient churches closer to their homes. They come because this little church has become something sacred, not just a place of worship, but a testament to the power of community and commitment to outlast even the most difficult circumstances. The church's story has resonated far beyond Millfield because it represents something that millions of Americans recognize in their own communities. According to recent studies, nearly half of all rural churches in the Great Plains states are at risk of closing within the next 20 years. Small towns across the heartland are facing the same challenges that nearly killed Millfield: economic decline, population loss, aging demographics, and the centralizing forces of modern life. But the Methodist Church in Millfield proves that survival is possible, even under the most challenging conditions. It requires sacrifice, adaptation, and a willingness to redefine success. For this congregation, success isn't measured in membership rolls or budget figures. It's measured in their ability to remain present, to offer hope and community to anyone who needs it, and to preserve something beautiful and meaningful for future generations. The church's influence extends even to people who never set foot inside its doors. Local historians credit the congregation with preserving much of Millfield's documented history. Environmental scientists study the prairie restoration project that church members began on the vacant lots around the building. Social workers point to the church's community outreach programs as a model for how small organizations can make a big difference in isolated rural areas. Perhaps most importantly, the church has become a symbol of resistance against the idea that small places don't matter, that rural communities are expendable in America's rush toward urbanization and efficiency. Every Sunday service is a quiet declaration that there is value in preserving spaces for reflection, community, and continuity, even when, especially when, the surrounding world seems to be falling apart. The people who keep this church alive aren't doing it for recognition or reward. Many of them drive long distances and contribute more money than they can easily afford to support a congregation that will probably never grow significantly larger. They do it because they understand that some things are worth preserving simply because they are good and beautiful and true. In an age when so much of American life feels temporary and disposable, when communities are often reduced to economic units, and everything is judged by its efficiency and profitability, the Methodist Church in Millfield stands as a reminder that the deepest human values, faith, community, persistence, hope, can survive and even flourish in the most unlikely places. The church's future remains uncertain. The congregation is aging, and there are no guarantees that the next generation will feel the same commitment to keeping the doors open. But for now, that white steeple continues to rise above the Nebraska prairie, visible for miles around, a lighthouse for anyone who might be looking for proof that some things endure. Every Sunday at 10 a.m., a small group of people gathers in that simple sanctuary to sing hymns, pray together, and affirm their faith in something greater than themselves. They do this not because it's easy or convenient or profitable, but because they believe it matters. And in a world where so much seems to be falling apart, perhaps that's the most radical act of all. The simple decision to show up, to persist, to keep the lights on and the doors open, no matter what. The last church standing in Millfield, Nebraska, is more than just a building. It's a living testament to the power of community, the strength of faith, and the extraordinary things that ordinary people can accomplish when they refuse to give up on something they love. Thanks for watching this episode of Professor Archive. If this story moved you or made you think differently about the places and communities around you, please consider supporting the channel with a super thanks. Every contribution helps us tell more stories like this one. And don't forget to let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Until next time, remember that history isn't just about the past. It's about the people who shaped the present and future through their choices, their courage, and their refusal to let the things that matter simply fade away.